Avodas HaParsha here near Avram, Erev Yom Kippur at night. It's very tempting just to speak about Yom Kippur, and I noticed going through Sura and looking for things on Parshas HaAzinu that some of them have a blank at Parshas HaAzinu.
A blank?
Meaning they'll have on Nitzavim, on Vayelech, and then they'll have on Zos HaBracha. Because HaAzinu comes out either just before Yom Kippur or between Yom Kippur and Sukkot, and there weren't drushes. People weren't saying the drushes on the Parsha. We'll take a pasuk from Parshas HaAzinu. So we have the pasuk here in Perek Lamed Beis, pasuk Zayin. Zechor yemos olam binu shnos vodor. Remember the days of the world. Think deeply about the years of generation to generation. Sha'al avicha v'yagedcha. Ask your father and he will tell you. Zekenecha v'yomru lach. Ask the elders and they will tell you. Okay, now this pasuk in general is often quoted by anyone who's giving shiurim about Jewish history, that it's important. It's a big lack that we don't know Jewish history. Oh, that's right. That's we're going to see from the Netziv. Right, they're more gentle. And the Netziv says like this, just because we're mentioning, let's look at the construction of the pasuk. Zechor yemos olam is singular. Use singular, remember the days of the world. Binu, plural, shnos vodor. You should understand the years of every generation. Sha'al avicha v'yagedcha, again singular. Zekenecha v'yomru lach, right, is again an idea of more plural. So the Netziv explains like this in Hamikdover. He says, Zechor yemos olam is something everybody has to do. You have to know where you come from. You have to know what happened, right? I've known people that were miskarev. This is a schus for Rabbi Wein. I know one person that he wasn't from it all. He said it just while he worked, somehow he got hold of these Rabbi Wein history tapes and just listened. He said, once you hear the story of who we are, he says, how can you not, right, join up? Right? Sarah Schnerer was supposed to have said that she felt that one of the big weaknesses in her generation when she was trying to work with the girls, that they had no idea of the history, no idea of the story. They were just kind of born into the society where you're told to do this and not do that. And at the time where there was so much turmoil and assimilation, haskalah, and all these different things, so it was very hard to hold on to it. Sarah Schnerer, right, from the founder of Beis Yaakov. Yeah. So the Nesif says like this. He says, Zechor yemos olam, this is every individual in Am Yisrael has to know what happened to us, where we come from, where we're going. Binu shnos vodor. Binu is a deeper form of understanding. Looking at the shifts of generation to generation, we'll see the derivation of that in a second. The word shnos meaning like shoneh, differences between generations. Sha'al avicha v'yagedcha. So again, once again, every individual, ask your father, right, where it comes from. Derech agav, for any younger listeners, sometimes people just don't ask a parent, a grandparent, anything about what happened in their lives, where they came from. And I was once assigned in school as a kid, interview a grandparent. And I interviewed my grandmother and I discovered many things I never knew before. She didn't tell me, I wasn't asking. And there are many things when you meet somebody, so sha'al. Zekenecha v'yomru lach, zekenim are chachamim, right? Like we say, wadorThe pnei zoken, it stands for zekana chachma. It's not necessarily someone who's elderly, it's a person who has wisdom. So there, v'yomru lach, this is individual. This is right, so zekenecha v'yomru lach is individual, because there's only certain people who have the chachma to really explain to you what's happening in the course of generations. Okay, to be able to interpret, to be able to, from a Torah perspective, know what's happening, not just the information of what happened historically, but what's happening in the shifts of generations from the Torah perspective. So why is that important? So the Shem Mishmuel says like this. He says, Zechor yemos olam shnos vodor. So in this piece, he says like this. The word shnos vodor, which we would literally read as the years of generation to generation, He wants to be mefarish, he said, according to the Ibn Ezra, and it doesn't seem to be Ibn Ezra on this pasuk, it must be someplace else, that the name Shana comes from the word shinui, difference, change. He says, first of all, you have to be able to learn from contrast. Light can only be understood in contrast to dark. Darkness in contrast to light. So he said there were different types of generations, and it's important to realize what previous generations were like so that we don't become arrogant and think that we're at the top of the ladder, right? It's very important. Sometimes, on one hand, you don't want to get caught into this mode of, once there were great rabbis, once there were tzaddikim, once there were this. The Torah told us, Chazal said, Yiftach bedora k'shmuel bedora. Meaning, you go to the Chachamim b'yomim mohem. That's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives you. And the Shem Mishmuel says, and guess what? If you think that the leaders of your generation aren't as great as the ones previously, that's because you're not as great as the previous generation. Right? He says that the Pnei of the Manhig comes from Pnei Ador. It comes from that. Okay, so it's important to realize that just to keep a person humble. It's interesting. I heard a beautiful explanation. Sometimes people are put off by the fact that after the first few generations of Hasidus, in many but not all cases, you started to have this idea of inheritance, that the son of the Rebbe, one of the sons of the Rebbe becomes the Rebbe, or a few sons of the Rebbe become Rebbes, right? They say the Nadverna Rebbe left in his tzava, all of his descendants, his male descendants should be Rebbes. They said, why? He said, then at least they'll be Shomer Shabbos. Right? That's what he was hoping. Yeah. And now it became, again, sometimes institutions, yeshivas, become heredity. So I heard a beautiful explanation. He said, it's not a thing of arrogance that this Rebbe is arrogant with the fact that he's the seventh generation from the Baal Shem Tov or something like that. What it is realizing that I am simply an extension of much greatness that came before me. I have the mandate to try and carry on what they did. Me, myself, who am I, what am I? The fact that I have anything only becomes from all that greatness before me. It's actually meant to be humbling as opposed to making arrogant. Okay, so he said this is important to do. Yeah. Exactly. Right, you treat it like a Malchus, yeah. They say the Rishon Rebbe used to have shoes with gold embroidery on them, but if he was standing on the snow for a while and he moved off, you would see blood in the snow because they had no soles. Right? He had reasons for acting with Malchus, good evening, on the outside, but to benefit Am Yisrael. Okay, so now he says, it's also important to take a look and know why generations changed, and to try to take a look. Okay, and that again needs these zakenim to be able to do it. He says, don't blame the leaders, which is always, the easy out to say the leaders didn't know, but to look at shifts that happened and learn from it. For example, many Torah-observant Jews came to America or other countries right in the early 1900s, and they founded shuls, they founded communities, but oftentimes it wasn't able to continue on to the next generation. And this education. And not schools. Now a lot of them are going to say, yeah, nice little towns that had big rabbanim and from communities. Now, some people might have said, okay, but back in wherever, we didn't have, Jewish schools. We didn't have, there were places in Europe where Jews went to the public school and they learned with the Rebbe afterwards and they said it was fine.
1 hour a week.
Yeah, right, the Hebrew school. And
1 hour a week on Wednesday afternoon when the Mlam would come from Providence to Wesley.
To this little place in Connecticut.
Rabbi, but they didn't have Parnasa. The problem was Parnasa. You could learn what you want, but they were dirt cheap. And the problem, I think if you go back to Napoleon and the Tsar,
Yeah.
they said, okay, what do we fight for? And they said, if you go to Napoleon, you'll get everything you wanted.
Equality.
And if you stay here, you're going to get hit over the head and you'll have Frumkeit. Well, most people went with Napoleon.
Right. So that's one shift which happens. The lack of schooling can be a shift. There are all sorts of different shifts. So he says, Binu, look at it deeply so that you can learn from it. Okay, he says, sometimes we don't understand that a small shift comes about, and because of that, things go. Correct. You know, the idea of not anticipating when people come to America and there aren't jobs that don't make you work on Shabbos, how do you prepare for that? What do you do? There were a few special people like the Edelstein family in my home state of Massachusetts. They opened up garment, textile mills. Huh? Yeah, I'm not related, but I'm from Boston. Yeah, so Feuerstein's here, there, and everywhere, and they gave Shomer Shabbos jobs to people. You know, these were, huh? Mike Tress, right? And there were others in different towns, different cities, but it's definitely not easy. So now let's take a look at something Rabbi Yaakov Edelstein said on a pasuk we say throughout Slichas on the same theme from Tilim. Leiv tahor brali elokim v'ruach nachon chadesh b'kirbi. Hashem, create for me a pure heart, and ruach nachon, a correct, a right, a prepared spirit, chadesh b'kirbi. Renew that inside of me to be something new. So he says like this. He says David HaMelech is asking for two things. Leiv tahor means, right, that a person has this idea of purity. He says a leader in Am Yisrael, there's two important preconditions. Number one is that the leader himself should be a good person. He should be on a high level, right? In Yerushalayim, Beinonim Lamokom, Beinonim Lachaveiro, because you find in the Gemara this statement, Kshot Atzmecha Tchila, meaning before you start telling other people what to do, right, you yourself, right, should be doing it, should be an example. Second, sheyeda as darkei hashpor lefi malach haruach betem l'tnei hazman b'amakom. You, a leader who are trying to be a mashpia, who are trying to influence the people in your generation positively, you have to know how to do it according to the conditions and the tendencies and the spirit of the time and the place that you're in. Okay? Meaning you have to be able to shift with it. He says because the ways that were successful and were appropriate 50 years ago are not appropriate now. They won't work. Things shift. Okay? And it's very hard because a person sometimes, you build up a certain way of doing things and suddenly people tell you that's not working with this new generation. And you say, what? It must be their problem. Now you have to know. He says, not everything that we're doing now is going to be suitable, right, in the next few years. They say, the Rav Dessler, right, who was certainly a product of Kelm, certainly a great Baal Musar, but he was a great synthesizer. He would bring in, if you look in the index in the back, he would bring in Tanya, he would bring in Likutei Moran of Breslov, he would bring in Pri Haaretz of Vitebsk, other Sfarim. And another great Rav who had learned in Kelm said to him, what you're doing is not Kelm. What you're doing is not Kelm. And Rav Dessler, from what I'd heard, said, it's an andere Welt. He said, it's another world. In other words, it's not saying that anything's wrong with it. It's not saying it should be rejected, but built on it, or even just the way you communicate it, right? He says has to be done. He says also you have to know how to deal with different types of people. Okay, just because something worked with one person, you were teaching a class of excellent, motivated students, and you got your teaching method down, it did great, but they shift you to a class of not so sharp, unmotivated, kind of wild students. It's not going to work, right? You have to be able to shift and deal with that. Chazal told us already, Shem shein partzufeim shovim. There's never been throughout history two people with exactly the same face. Even identical twins, parents learn subtle little differences in them. Kach ein deoseim shovos. So too their deos, which means the way they interact with things, connect with things, understand things, are also unique, are also going to be different. Right? So a manig needs to know how to shift his ruach and to get it to be in sync with not only a generation, but also even with each person, right? There are different approaches to what it says in Pirkei Avos, Al tadun es chavercha ad shetagia limkomo, right? Don't judge your friend until you are in his place. And some of us say, and guess what? You'll never be in his place, meaning you've never gone through everything he's gone through in life. You can never know everything about him. I saw in one of the Tel Sfarim that they said that it was one of the sons of Rabbi Yosef Yudalei Bloch. He said, my father, when he would sit with someone who's getting Eitzah, he would spend time and concentrate and focus until he really felt he was able to enter the makom of that person. He was able to be with that person and understand, and only that way could he advise him, right? Because if you're going to be giving a person advice from outside his world and outside his reality, so that doesn't work. Now he says, don't get me wrong. HaTorah shekibalnu b'Sinai nitzchisi. The Torah is eternal, okay? There's no idea of shifting the Torah from one generation to the generation like the Reform would say. He says not one tiny spike on the top of the Yud, Kutso Shuyud, what's called, is ever going to change. Okay, that is one of the bases of our Emunah. But the ways in which you people can reach the Torah are going to change constantly, according to the time, according to the place, and according to the situation. So therefore, this is what David HaMelech was asking. He said, Leiv tahor broli Elokim, create for me a pure heart. That means that I should become a whole person as I should be. Okay? Because the Leiv, so to speak, is viewed as the center of everything we do. Right? Why? Right? We have physicians here, we have these things. The Leiv is simply a muscle, right, that goes, but the Leiv reflects what you're feeling. Okay? The heart, the way it works, it reflects what you're feeling, and it reflects the idea of ratzon, of desire. I once heard Rav Wolbe say, he said, bottom line, a person does what he wants. He says, so what you have to do is work on developing what you want, or transforming what you want, instead of just fighting against what you're doing, okay? So that's the idea of the Leiv. But this, he said, he asked Hashem, create this for me. A one-time creation, give it to me so that I should have this. But then he asked, Ruach Nochon, Chadesh B'kirbi. Give me the right Ruach, the right spirit, that renew inside of me. He says, the Ruach... Calm? I'm not sure, I haven't seen it as calm. Nochon, usually it means like... Nachon, yeah, like nachon. Yeah, so that Chadesh B'kirbi, David HaMelech says, the tzibur is going to be changing all the time. And different individuals, and people in this city, and people in that city. Give me the ability to be able to be new, to renew, right? That's not something that's a creation one time, but it's something that a person has to be constantly be mechadesh, constantly be mischadesh. So that really fits with this pasuk, Binu shnos dor vodor. This is something that the Chachamim have to look at and help them understand, like the Shem Mishmuel said, shnos dor vodor, that the generation has changed, right? And to be able to find the right way to plug in. So one of the beautiful examples of this, I want to get the Sefer, they reprinted it now, of writings of Rav Hirsch, letters and things like that. So there was a letter that he wrote to a cousin, kind of at the beginning of his campaign, so to speak, and he said, it was revealed to me, min hashamayim, what I'm supposed to do in the world. Doesn't sound like such a yekish thing to say, you know. So he said, I was riding on a train and I had a dream. In my dream, I was looking down, like from above, on a small German village, and what I saw, there were old men walking, leaning on sticks, and the young people were taking the sticks away from them, and they were cutting them up and making them into toys. And then in my dream, I felt I was now standing in this village, and one of the old men came over. He held out his stick to me, and it was all battered and dusty. He said, do you know what this is? He said, so I said, no. He opened it up. It was a Sefer Torah. And with that, he woke up. So he said, that was the Metzias. That was what was happening in Germany. Meaning that the Torah observance, mitzvahs, had all become looking dusty and old and battered and outdated to the young people. So what the Reform were doing, were cutting it up and turning it into toys. He said, I realized that my mission was to give the authentic Torah in a way which to that younger generation would be current and relevant and attractive in these things, and authentic, right? That was his challenge, and that was what he did. It's a big trick to do because people, you become married to the way you do things oftentimes. You have a certain approach, and a person has to learn to be able to change and shift as things happen. That's part of the infinity of Torah, that there are so many drachim in which to connect to Torah. And that's why it's sometimes hard for a parent, for a Rebbe. Why is it my child, my Talmud, doesn't like this sefer? I loved that sefer when I was his age, right? Why doesn't he want to do? It's hard, but you have to understand. I'll finish with an interesting inside story that I heard from the Tolner Rebbe. I believe he heard this from his brother-in-law, Rabbi Weisblum, who was the mashgiach of the yeshiva in Haifa called Nachlas Halavim. And he was one of the closest Talmidim of Rav Wolbe. So he said toward the end of his life, Rav Wolbe had his last meeting where he gathered mashgichim from a variety of yeshivas in the Yerushalayim area, other places. And he told them the following. He said, I hear that if you go out into the streets of Yerushalayim in the middle of town, late at night, 1 a.m, you will find yeshiva guys draying around there doing who knows what. He says, why is this happening? So first, some of the Rebbeim tried to say, Rebbe, there are always, a few bad apples. It's always been throughout history. Show me a yeshiva that doesn't have some bad apples. I don't like that expression, bad apples. Not such a thing. But we'll be having Ma'ariv at
8:30.
Yeah. So Rav Wolbe, somebody had actually brought him, they had filmed the scene in town at that time of night with a timestamp on it. This was in Yerushalayim, in downtown Yerushalayim, and you saw many guys with white shirts and dark pants, draying around at 1 a.m. He said, so don't tell me this is just a rare phenomenon. He says, what do we do about this? So one Rav said, I know. We're going to institute in all yeshivas a test on Sunday on the material of the previous week. Any bacher who doesn't get an 80 on the test, out of the yeshiva. Huh? The days, I don't know particularly which day it was. It could be Thursday night, could be others, right? But here, just to keep them chazering, let's say he says you'll have this test, and anybody who doesn't get an 80% is out of the yeshiva. So we're going to have more guys on the street. What's that going to do? So another Rav said, I know. He says, when I was a bacher, what really got me connected to learning was to say chaburas. We had a chabura, you say a chabura, that means you work on a piece to present, you work and you give it over to a group of guys and they ask you questions, and you do. He says, it was so geschmack, it was so exciting, so fulfilling. And Rav Wolbe said, I don't think that's what they're looking for. I don't think that they're wandering around out there because nobody suggests they say a chabura. So they said, so what's the answer? He said, I don't know. He says, but that's your job. He says, if you're in charge of this generation, you have to find out what their emptiness comes from. What are they looking for? What are they running away from? And you have to find the way to connect them to Torah. That's Binu, Shnot, vodor. So it's a task for everyone, certainly for teachers, for zakenim, but the generations now change so quickly. Used to be a generation was 20 years, now they say a generation 6 months. So it goes so quickly. And instead of grumbling and mumbling about, the young people, the new people, things aren't like what they were, so to speak, the Torah is telling you, get with it. Binu, Shnot, vodor. Doesn't mean that the Torah changes whatsoever, but you have to know how to bring it to the table in the right way. With that, hopefully, we'll be able to bring all of them.